In the early light of dawn, farmers rise, their hands weathered but strong. Nurturing the earth with love and labor, they coax life from the soil, planting seeds of hope and resilience. Through storms and sunshine, they stand as guardians of the land, reminding us of our deep connection to nature. To the farmers, we offer our heartfelt gratitude. Your toils feed the world and sustain us all. Before we head into the grain elevator, I want to do a simplified rundown with a diagram on how an elevator works. Again, I'm going to keep it as simple as I can. Now, not all elevators work the same, but in principle, they are very similar. When a farmer arrives at the grain elevator, they first check in with the manager, who verifies the quality of the grain. Once the grain is accepted, the truck is weighed on the scale to determine the load's weight. After weighing, the farmer unloads the grain into the receiving pit or hopper, where it is transported by auger or conveyor into the larger bins. Once enough grain has accumulated in these bins, the manager will schedule the loading of the grain cars. The grain is then moved from the storage bins to the mixer and then to the back hopper. Then it's weighed and dropped into the pit, where it is picked up by the elevator leg. It goes up to the top to the distributor and sent to the spout that fills the railroad cars or grain trucks in the loading area. After filling, the cars are sealed and prepared for transport to markets, completing the cycle from harvest to sale.
Good morning. Welcome to the Alberta Legacy Development Society, the Leduc Heritage Grain Elevator. You are on the ramp, entering the breezeway where the trucks would enter. All the grain trucks would come in and they would park on this cement strip that goes up the middle. This is the scale. So we have a 90-foot scale here. They park, they weigh the whole truck, take a sample, because they need to decide if they want the grain. Too wet, you don't want, because wet grain goes moldy. And it also has a lovely little chemical reaction where it will heat up and spontaneously combust. And a big fireball in a wooden elevator, never a good combo. Once they decide they want the grain, they're going to dump it down the pit. Once all the grain is out of the truck, they weigh the truck again, because now they know how much they've deposited. Now they have to store it. So they're going to choose a bin. This elevator was equipped with 32 different bins. This is the indicator wheel. Right. This is called the leg. This is basically a conveyor belt with buckets. Right. There's a pedal down at the bottom where you would step on. Up top where we can't see it is a spout called a Gerber spout. It would lift. You would turn the wheel, which would turn the Gerber spout to whichever bin you choose. Take your foot off the pedal, and the spout will go into the hole in the floor. The man lift is here. This is what the manager would use to go up and check. Elevators are designed to move up and down because of the weight of the grain. So the construction is very traditional for this elevator. It's what they call a single composite wood crib. Single because there's one tower. Composite, they took a mix. And the wood crib is this construction where the boards are stacked one on top of the other to give it strength and stability. So unlike home construction with vertical studs, with these stacked, it can take the weight of the grain, but it could still push the building out of alignment. So this half of the building, the whole half, floats. And I don't know if it's springs or a trough, and I've seen the mouse poop, so I'm not going under to look. But this will actually rise or sink. So the reflective tape would show you, right? It's a little step, you don't trip. If you can't see it, so if this floor is level with this one, or you have to step down on this side, your elevator is full and you should maybe ship some grain. Right? But I love how, if you look, none of these boards are attached to the beams, and you can see through all along the side. So the design construction, those engineers knew what they were doing. So over here is a bin. This elevator is actually not very old. It was built in 1978 on the site of 3 older elevators. The oldest, which was built 1905-ish, was just south of here, and then 2 others to the north. This is what they call a hopper floor, so it has this slope. Older elevators, it could be flat, which meant that once you got the grain out enough to open the door, someone would have to get in and shovel out the corners. With this one, you didn't have to. Around the perimeter, you have long, thin bins that go from the bottom all the way up. And then overhead are little ones. To get the grain out of these bins are these metal handles. So you would open this, the gate at the bottom slides out, the grain falls back to the pit, back to the leg, to the Gerber spout, and where you've told it to go. It's a big circuit. And so you didn't have to constantly run up top to adjust the gates for the little bins. They manufactured these levers so that you could do it from down here. The chalkboards were used to keep track of the weight and what was in each bin, because you had to alternate. Too much weight on one side, because the building floats, it'll tip over. So between spontaneous combustion and tipping over, you had to be on your toes. This hallway is the peaceful place here, because you're insulated on 3 sides by the elevator, so it's really nice and quiet. But you have access to bins on each side and overhead. Down at the window end, there's a motor, and running under this floor, there's an auger, a big drill. If you notice, each pillar has 4 levers, 2 metal, 2 wooden, so 4 bins. The grain would go through the pillar to the auger, which would then push it back to the pit, to the leg, to the Gerber spout, and on it goes. This elevator was equipped with a siphoning system, so it could siphon grain dust and put it in a bin that they could, I don't know if they sold it or if they gave it away, but you could use it for fertilizer or whatever you needed it for. There are trap doors everywhere because we sit at least 20 feet up. This is your shipping side. Out those doors, there's a platform, and up in the wall, there's a spout. There's 3 sets of railroad track here. The 2 closest are what they call siding. It's train parking. And the furthest one is active, and CP comes through daily. There is another leg that faces the other side. This is for the shipping. And bins. They're little bins that would be for the train. But before anything will actually go in the train, you're going to run it through the hopper. What the hopper will do is it will count the bushels and it will weigh it. So you'll use the Fairbanks scale. This elevator was built to hold 121,000 bushels. I doubt it ever did, but it could. And I figured it out. So 1 bushel of wheat, so every grain weighs a different amount, so wheat would be 60 pounds, or 1 husky. They had charts on each side because they needed to be precise with their weights for the railroads. So depending on their hopper car would depend on how much would go in each bin, each car. And you did need to be precise because you don't want to trip a scale, because an overloaded car can cause a derailment, so that's not good. So if you've made a mistake and your car is overloaded and the scale goes, that train pulls off at the nearest siding and they phone you. And it doesn't matter what time it is or how far away you are, you and your shovel get to go and lighten the load. A lot of elevators had deals with farmers along the tracks where they could phone and say, we've made a mistake, there's this much of this at this point, do you want it? Farmer says yes, awesome. You probably still had to pay a fine, but you didn't have to drive 2 hours at 3 in the morning, spend however long shoveling, and then 2 hours back. So that was always good. And I love the reuse of things. The end of the pipe is a Ford hubcap. The grain sampler is a tuna can, because you would have to grab samples of the grain. They would go in the pail. It would then go in a bag, sent with the train to the destination, so they knew what was in each car. And then the pencil holder is a 7-Up can. Oh, this truck brought the last load of grain to this elevator before the elevator closed in 2000. It's a 1971 International Harvester, Lodestar, 1600 series. It has just under 83,000 original miles on it and is in original condition. And it was used local. This area is called the scale room or the grading room, because this is where all your samples would come. The scale, unlike the fancy Fairbanks scale, is kind of a letdown because it's this little box right here. It was digital. So they would do their weights here. These are moisture meters, so there's 3 different types. This type is still what they like because it has a bigger tower, so you can test a bigger sample. The sieves were used to sort for how clean your crop was. So you could run it through, separate weeds from grain, how much rock, chaff, whatever is in it, and that would help determine the grade it's given. The little boxes were what were used to keep a sample, because when there was a dispute, they could pull it out and say, this is what you brought. And it wasn't if, it was when. And the scales were also used to extrapolate weight, moisture content for the whole load. These are some of the grains that are grown in this area. This is a dockage machine, and I am not sure if it was only for canola, but the idea would be you'd run a sample of your crop through, separate weeds from grain, assign your percentage, because you needed that. If your crop was 2% weeds, they docked 2% from what you got paid, because weeds are free. The stone tools are local. Our oldest board member, George Harbottle, passed away in 2020 at the age of 99. And he grew up on a farm in Nisku, which is just north of here. Nisku has creeks that goes through. So one of the creeks was one end of the property line, and where it met the neighbor's property line, stand of trees. And after it rained or the plow went through, these would percolate up to the surface and he would go and pick them up. So I took them to the Royal Alberta Museum, and I had a couple of my old professors do the identification, so they are properly labeled and dated. What's fascinating is that there are 4 spearheads here from 10,000 years ago. This area, this is the men's version of the hairdressers. It's TikTok without the music and dancing. You want to know what your neighbor 3 farms up is doing? This is the place to come. Because they could only work on 1 truck at a time, so everyone would be lined up outside. They would come in, they would sit, drink coffee, play crib, and solve all the world's problems. The manager and the secretary would have been in this office, and everything else out here. This was where you got paid, where you did your paperwork for if you were storing something, having your crop cleaned or dried. This is the original computer from here. I'm guessing early 80s. This is the hard drive. So this would be your desktop. This was actually in the basement because it's so big, and they drilled a hole through the floor for the cords so they could move everything over. You had a dot matrix printer, paper printer, modem, because of course it's dial-up, enormous keyboard, tiny little monitor with only green letters, there was no color, and a disk drive that I know has been upgraded because it probably started life as either a tape or a 5 1/4, and what's inside is a 3 1/2, so it would have had the little diskette. This building was equipped with 2 phones, which is pretty fancy. So you had one out here and one in the office. The phone line is hooked to a siren in the breezeway so that if there's no one in the office and the phone rings, you can hear it. So over here, we have a photograph of Leduc from 1953. This is the oldest elevator. This was 1905-ish. And there's the other 2. We sit here. So these are the 3 they tore down to build this elevator. But what I love is 1953, it's still dirt roads with wooden sidewalks. There was a water tower, but not for the people. This was for the trains, because trains didn't switch to diesel until 57. And a lot of the buildings are still here. This is Dr. Wood's House Museum, the Waldorf. This was the post office. It's now co-work. This was, when we moved to Leduc, it was the cash store, but it's now Leduc Coffee Shop. And paving happened sometime between 56 and 59. So 3 buildings were built at the same time. The North Warehouse, the fertilizer elevator, and this, all built at the same time. They used the wood from the oldest elevator to build the fertilizer elevator. The North Warehouse was moved whole from New Norway, Camrose, probably within a year or so of this being built. So it was built by Alberta Wheat Pool, which became Alberta Pool, which joined with the Manitoba Wheat Board or Commission and became Agricor. Agricor has joined with the Saskatchewan Wheat Board or Commission and is now Viterra. So in the 90s was when the railroad started closing and tearing out all the secondary rail lines, which meant all the communities that had grain elevators no longer had access to trains to get grain to market. So farmers now have to drive further and haul more. This is why farmers have semis, dual trailers. You need more equipment. So now they use terminals or the big cement structures or the big granary type ones, which there would be a whole bunch. And there's less. It used to be that there was basically a grain elevator about every 5 miles, because that was generally as far as the horse could go there and back in a day. But in the 90s, everything was going. So 1998, the rumors started to go around Leduc that Agricor was going to close and tear down this elevator. And by that point, it was the only one left. Now, in all openness, it was my mother heard that rumor, did not think that was such a good idea. And she phoned a local man, his picture's up on the wall. His name was Bob Kane, and he was a local rancher. Like, he raised bison, he farmed, he worked in the oil patch, he wrote books. He was a definite Renaissance man. He agreed with my mother, and the Alberta Legacy Development Society formed from that nobody knows what that is. So we just say we're the Leduc Heritage Grain Elevator, and everyone goes, oh, right. So then they had to go to work. It was a lot of letter writing, grants, donations, fundraising. It was bake sales, book sales, you name it, they did it. And it took until 2000 because you had to buy the land from CP and the buildings from Agricor. Okay. Once we secured the land from CP, Agricor very generously returned all of our deposit except for $1. So we got 4 buildings for $1. It was amazing. Once that had been completed, Agricor ceased operations, so from 78 to 2000, and we took over. 2003, we got registered historic resource status, so we are protected by the province. And there you have it. Thank you.